Welcome in to the Flagship Podcast. It is game week, Texas and Ohio State. 1 versus 2 in the coaches poll, 3 in the AP poll, but no matter how you slice it, it is a top 10, top 5 showdown. In fact, every meeting between Texas and Ohio State has been a top 10 showdown. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by Eric Henry of Horns247.com. And today we are joined by Pat Murphy of Bucknuts.com, the Ohio State site on the preeminent 24/7 sports network. Eric, Patrick, what a game we've got. Eric, let me get your thoughts first. As we head into this colossal showdown in Columbus, 11 a.m. on Saturday on Fox, Ohio State. And Fox wanted to move this game to Sunday night at the Horseshoe. Texas said, nah, we're okay. We're good on this. Eric, what's your level of excitement for this one?
Yeah, Chip, my level of excitement is, on a scale of 1 to 10, it'd be, a 50. Like, I don't know how to quantify it. I'm super fired up for this. Regular listeners of this show know my personal background, right? Having spent 6 years covering Group of 5 football. It's a little bit different covering Texas, Ohio State, number 1, number 3 versus FIU, Jack State in front of 800 people. So it's no disrespect to those programs. I've enjoyed that time, but come on, this is what you live for as a college football fan, what you get into this business to do. That's on a personal level, or on a professional level, on a personal level. I mean, you talk about all the storylines, and I don't want to take all of Pat's thunder. I'm sure he'll get into it as well, but you come off a rematch of last year's college football playoff semifinal where Texas just that close again for the second straight year, Chip, just that close to getting over the hump and making a national title game. Couldn't get there. You talked about the storyline of this game, potentially moved to Sunday and it being an even bigger spectacle than it is now. But no, I'm super fired up, ready for what should be an exciting season, one way or the other, Chip, for Texas football. A lot to be excited about. So I won't steal too much of Pat's thunder, leave him some room to talk about what he's fired up about.
Well, Pat, I mean, you're in Columbus. Obviously, you've been around the team. What's the vibe there? I think the get-in seats are like 300 plus. I've seen tickets as high as $3,000 if you want to sit on the 50-yard line. What's the level of what's the vibe there in Columbus?
Excitement. I think the way Eric put it is similar to what it's like here. I was at I do one of the local radio shows a few days a week, and they were doing a live show at a bar close by my house. So I went over there yesterday, even though I wasn't on it, and they were giving away tickets to the game. There was like a raffle they were doing, or a lottery. And they make an announcement in the bar, like, hey, go fill this out, put your name on. And people just like swarm to the guy who is collecting all these. As you mentioned, it's not a cheap seat. So I can understand why people are looking for other ways to try and get in. But yeah, look, you get 1 versus 3, 1 versus 2, however you want to look at it. Ohio State's never played number 1 team in the country week 1. I imagine if Texas has, it doesn't happen all that often. So you just don't get this, especially on campus. I know they have some of these neutral site games and stuff week 1, but this is exciting. I think we're going to learn a lot about these two teams, but obviously they'll grow as they go on. I think within the building, there's a sense of let's see what we've got type of thing. They obviously know how good Texas is, and this is a new look team, 17 guys who were key contributors from Ohio State last year that won that national championship are gone. They do have some key guys back, as we'll get into, but this is going to be a first test. This isn't rolling out against Akron like Ohio State did last year. And okay, yeah, you look good doing it, but do you know really about yourself? Win or lose, you come out of this game, and I think they feel like they will know about themselves. And I think Texas probably feels the same way. This will be a good test early on. And the nice thing about the 12-team college football playoff is neither of these teams are done, win or lose this game.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this thing, Pat, you see Ohio State, they lose 14 guys to the NFL draft. Texas lost 12 guys to the NFL draft. These are very different teams from the ones that met 8 months ago. Where is Ohio State the most different?
I would say probably the defensive line. If we're just talking position groups, all 4 starters are gone. So the guys that you saw in that Cotton Bowl playoff semifinal, it's a whole different group. Some of those guys played, they rotated in, but Ohio State leaned on the starters quite a bit. They were all seniors or some fifth-year seniors. So it's a new look group. You've got what we expect to be Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry at defensive end. Those two were 3-year backups behind Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. They sort of waited their turn. But the Buckeyes did bring in Bo Atkinson from North Carolina, who came after the spring or in the spring window after spring practice. And he's been impressive in fall camp. They also brought in Logan George from the FCS level at Idaho State. He's a guy who's been banged up in fall camp, but did some good things during spring practice. A guy, obviously making a jump, but seems to fit in decently well. And then CJ Hicks was a 5-star linebacker who's going into his senior year, hasn't played a ton, and they've moved him into sort of a pass rushing role. The interior of the defensive line is sort of where the biggest questions are. The Buckeyes like the starters, Caden McDonald and Edric Houston. Edric Houston had a knee injury at the start of fall camp, but seems to have bounced back from that. Behind them, the depth is a question mark. And Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach, talked about how he felt comfortable last year playing Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, the two interior defensive linemen, a lot because they were experienced guys, multi-year starters. They knew how to handle taking 30, 40, 50 snaps a game if needed. These two guys are stepping in for the first time in these roles. So how much can they carry is going to be a question mark. What does the depth look like? But for me, that's the biggest, just because you lost all 4 starters, every other position group, you got at least one guy coming back. But that one is going to be a whole new looking group for the Buckeyes.
Pat, I'll kind of jump in here, and I want to ask you this. Much of the conversation on the Texas side has been replacing 4 new starters, or replacing 4 stars from last year's group, I should say, on the offensive line, as Texas will bring in 4 new starters. Can you give Texas fans, we'll talk about, the stars, right? Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, etc. But can you give Texas fans maybe an idea of what the Buckeyes pose from a defensive line, from a pass rush, front 7 perspective? Because I think that's the biggest concern. That's Steve Sarkisian's own words. He said about 10 days ago, his biggest concern was offensive line depth, and Chip's done an excellent job reporting Trevor Goosby's status, kind of day by day. So can you just kind of give, Texas fans an idea of what the Horns may face from a front 7 perspective?
Yeah. So the unproven edge rushers, I'd say, and I think I mentioned Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, like there's a big belief in those guys. We just haven't seen it because JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer played so much the last 2 years. But they like them. Kenyatta Jackson is a name who's come up a lot. He's a physical freak. I mean, he's the first guy off the bus type of looking guy, and he's really kind of embraced this role of I need to be a leader, which is something he talked about. Not necessarily feeling comfortable with early on this offseason, but also like this is my time. He was a highly ranked kid coming out of high school. Actually, went to high school with Jeremiah Smith down in Florida. So he's a guy who I think has just sort of been chomping at the bit. And look, we don't see that very much, right? 2 seniors that don't play very much, waiting their turn at programs now in the transfer portal era. Caden Curry's a guy who I think is a high motor, just going to kind of go at you. But how effective they can be, they like what they've seen, in bits and pieces in games. I know in practice there's been some very positive moments. We don't know until they get out there. Now, I think Bo Atkinson is interesting, especially in this one, because he is an experienced guy. He's, played a lot of games at North Carolina. Obviously, playing in a game like this is a different animal, but at least he's, started games, been in games. I like what we've seen from him at practice. So he may be a 3rd rotation guy in there that could be interesting. I don't know how much Logan George will play because, as I said, he's been a little banged up. But CJ Hicks is another really interesting just because, moving from linebacker, he sort of always wanted to rush the passer. Like that's always been his big thing, even from a linebacker position, which has been part of the reason he hasn't been able to get on the field that much at linebacker. But they've been very clear, like you can't just be a guy we only bring in on 3rd downs, passing downs, whatever it is. So how much has his game grown from a, full what you need from a defensive end type of player? And then On the interior, Edric Houston, if he's fully healthy, I think he's an interesting guy because he is a former 5-star defensive end, was a freshman last season. Like partway through the season, they moved him to the interior because he'd gotten big. They thought his body made a bit more sense. Plus, they needed a little depth in there. So that's a guy from the interior that could cause team issues just because he does have some of that pass rush background. So, like I said, they like the guys on paper at least, or what they've seen in practice. But this will be the first time really any of these guys have done it at this level.
Pat, I want to flip it over to the Ohio State offensive line. Donovan, Texas fans are like, oh man, Kelvin Banks is gone. He was a first-round pick. Ohio State had 2 offensive linemen who were first-round picks in the NFL draft, in Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons. So tell me about the offensive tackles for Ohio State who are going to be going up against what Texas hopes is a formidable defensive end tandem in Colin Simmons and Ethan Burke.
The tackles have been a talking point in fall camp because we went into the start of preseason sort of expecting things to continue and carry over from the end of spring practice, which you had Ethan Onyanwa, who played the last 3 years at Rice, transferred in at left tackle, and Austin Saraveld, who last year was sort of rotating mid-game between guard spots at right tackle. That's the way they ended spring. That's the way they started fall camp. Then about a week and a half, 2 weeks into fall camp, I actually asked Ryan Day, what makes Austin Saraveld a fit at tackle? And he says left tackle in the answer. And so he paused and I was like, you mean right tackle, right? And he was like, no, Austin's playing left tackle. And said it very nonchalantly, even though we'd not seen that. They had not talked about it. And that quickly became like 5 questions in a row about, wait, you're moving guys around now halfway through fall camp. So I think the way that they will settle is with Austin Saraveld, who has been very versatile, playing left tackle. And then Phillip Daniels, who is a Minnesota transfer. This will be his second season. He was a guy who I kind of expected to be more of a developmental guy, but is really putting a lot of work this offseason, especially during the summer. You could tell he's a guy from Cincinnati who wasn't offered by Ohio State coming out of high school, and being an Ohio State Buckeye matters to him. He's made that clear. So I think the work he's put in has elevated him. I would be surprised if he's not the starting right tackle on Saturday. Now, both of these guys are new to the position. This will be a theme throughout this, right? Guys stepping into bigger roles. Austin Saraveld has only played guard in games for Ohio State. Phillip Daniels started 4 games at Minnesota last year, but that's only because they were banged up at the position. So I think it's going to be a huge test for these guys. You mentioned the edge rushers Texas has. We're going to find out very quickly how well these guys are going to hang up a tackle. Onyanwa's still in the mix. Ryan Day said on Tuesday that they hadn't made a decision at right tackle. Onyanwa also did some repping at guard throughout camp. But yeah, I think the tackles there are going to be 2 guys who are sort of stepping into this big stage for the first time, but also guys that have earned these spots.
Pat, like I said, we'll kind of transition, get to the big time stars in this game. And, I know for me, I don't want to say matchup, but the number one thing I think, when we exchange Q&As, and obviously that will be up on the site later this week, both of our sites later this week, you asked, where does Ohio State have a clear advantage? And for me, it's wide receiver, right? We're talking about Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. Of course, we know Texas had Jahdae Barron last year. He's off to the NFL. There's a lot of expectation for a guy like Malik Muhammad to step up in the secondary, and Jalen Gilbo making the move to outside corner. But just from your read on things, I guess to put it plainly, how good is Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, and what can Texas fans expect as far as how they may deploy those guys on Saturday?
I think it'll be similar to what you saw in the playoff. I think it also kind of depends how Texas decides to defend those guys, right? We saw in Dallas, Texas tried to take away Jeremiah Smith, right? And it was Carnell Tate who ended up having the biggest receiving game. And that's kind of what the Buckeyes expect. They've been saying this for years. You go back to Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Okay, take one away. How are you going to stop both of them? Then Jackson Smith and Jigba started to emerge. Then you had Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. And then last year, Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith with Carnell Tate in the mix as well. So, look, Ohio State's wide receivers the last, 5, 6, 7 years it's a story I don't need to tell most of college football fans. But that's what they're hoping for, is like, look, if you're going to focus on Jeremiah, which I think a lot of teams will, and Texas obviously had success with that a year ago, then we'll use Carnell Tate. Now, I do think there is going to be a concerted effort to move Jeremiah around a little bit more this season. Again, how much we see it in this game, I don't know. But Brian Hartline, who's been the wide receivers coach who sort of built this room, is now the offensive coordinator. And he's talked about the need to, get these guys in different positions. They all cross-train at different spots. And then I'll throw Brandon Innes in there. He's sort of taken over the slot role that Emeka Egbuka played last year. He's outside of Columbus and Buckeye Nation, he's probably a pretty unknown quantity, but another highly ranked kid who's waited his turn in this receiver room. Made a big catch in the national championship game on, I think it was a third down to convert for first down. He's been waiting. He was voted a captain. He's been very vocal, a leader even last year when he wasn't playing that much. He's a guy I know they're really excited to see what he can do in games more frequently. So they'll move those guys around. I think they'll have plans for, hey, if Texas does this, if Texas does that. But it's a dangerous weapon. I agree with you. I think it's hard to find a secondary in the country that's going to be able to slow down completely this entire group, just because they do have so many weapons. And, if we had more time, I could go into the guys that they have coming off the bench as well. It's definitely the strength of this team, the depth that they have with wide receiver.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Julian Sayin approaches it. Will Howard was a fifth-year guy. He knew how to, read defense and see, okay, they're putting everything on Jeremiah Smith. How disciplined is Julian Sayin in saying, okay, they're doubling Jeremiah, I got to go over here. But I also want to ask you, well, we'll stay on that. Julian Sayin, I don't know how much, time you all have gotten with him, if at all. And, what's your impression based on what you're hearing from the other players, what his strengths are, how's his mental makeup in handling this moment, because he's now the quarterback of the defending national champs in a home game against the number one team in the country.
Yeah, Chip, I think you hit the nail on the head with sort of the comparison with Will Howard, and how are you going to, do in these situations? And maybe the easiest way to stop Ohio State's receivers is get to the quarterback, make him uncomfortable. We talked about the tackles, being new guys and things like that. So that could be the if you can't throw the ball, then the receivers don't matter too much, right? But they're very high on Julian Sayin. I go back to last offseason, and we were hearing from players, from people in the building, Will Howard's probably going to be the guy. He's the experience. He's settling in and all this after transferring from Kansas State. But this Julian Sayin kid is very much in the mix. There were players I know that I talked to off the record that were like, if it were up to me, he would be the guy. Now, you went with the experienced guy. He settled in. Obviously, it all works out. You win the national championship, right? But there were throws that Julian was making. Some of them we saw in their preseason camp last year, some of which we didn't see but heard about, that were the jaw-dropping type of throws you expect from a five-star. I think it was the number 3 quarterback in the country coming out. I'm sure it's similar with Arch Manning before you guys got to really see him in games, right? Some of the stories and things you hear about a player like that. So we started to see it more and more. But the big thing this offseason was consistency. You make some of those throws, but then he also makes some boneheaded plays, throwing it to the wrong guy. And as fall camp started and progressed, he found that consistency. And that's what separated him in the quarterback competition with Laken Kienholz. Was Kienholz had just been steady, but probably didn't have as high of a ceiling. Julian has the high ceiling, but he needed to find that steady consistency. And he started to find that, I'd say, about 2 weeks into fall camp. From what we'd heard, really coming out of the second scrimmage, or maybe after the first scrimmage, and then that week leading into the second scrimmage was when it became clear to most people he was going to be the guy, even though I think most people thought that was going to be the end result. Now, you asked about how he's going to handle a situation like this. Another unknown, right? You just don't know until you see it. He's a kid who played in big-time games in California in high school, but this is a whole different level, right? Now, I will say he does have that kind of California cool, relaxed, demeanor to himself. So I don't think he's going to get overly rattled, but still just, making the right decisions like we were talking about, getting the ball to the open guy and not trying to force it to certain weapons and things like that. We just haven't seen it from him yet. He's thrown 12 passes in his college career. They've all come in garbage time. Does have one touchdown pass to a wide open tight end, but nothing like what he's going to see on Saturday. So, another question where I'm going to have a much better answer for you after the game.
Chip, go ahead and bring us home.
I wanted to ask you about the tight ends because, Max Clare, arguably the top tight end in the transfer portal, just ahead of Jack Endries, who Texas got at tight end out of the transfer portal. And Will Kasmerick, is that how I pronounce it?
You got it. Yep.
He's 6'6", Claire's 6'5". I mean, what are you expecting from these tight ends?
Yeah, this is a different looking tight end room than Ohio State has typically had. If you think back to Ohio State tight end rooms, it's interesting we're talking about this given how the game ended the last time these two teams played, with a tight end dropping the ball in the end zone. One of the local papers did a story with him recently and just how that moment's kind of haunted him for so long. But this is more of a group that is well balanced. Like the Max Clare, obviously an elite pass catcher at Purdue last year, third team All Big Ten. Will Kasmerick, certainly more of the stereotypical blocking tight end, but he's worked a lot on adding that receiving to his game. He was a guy who began his career at Ohio University. He was one of those 2020 kids that, at least in his eyes, was sort of overlooked coming out of St. Louis, just like not really scouted with the high school he went to and sort of the COVID restrictions. So he always felt like he could play at this level, but he goes to Ohio U, I should say, plays there, plays well, and then transfers to Ohio State last year. Had a good year last year playing with G. Scott Jr., but he got hurt in the Oregon game mid-season, missed, I think, 4 games, and it just took time to kind of get back in. So he's fully healthy. I think they make a really interesting 1-2 punch with, the more receiving guy, the guy who's a better blocker. They were roommates in fall camp, so they've been trading techniques on their strengths to try and help the other guy's weaknesses. And then it's probably the deepest room on the team. And I say that having already said what I said about the wide receivers, because you've got Bennett Christian, who's a senior who's been around for a long time. He's sort of that nice in-between between a pass catcher and a blocker. Jelani Thurman, who is a highly recruited guy coming out of Georgia. He's much more on the pass-catching side, and fans have been waiting for him. This will be his 3rd year to sort of break out, and I'm wondering what kind of influence Max Clare can have on him. So they've got a handful of guys. Tight ends coach Keenan Bailey's talked about, he pushes to have 3-4 tight ends on the field. Now, when you have those receivers, it's hard to do those type of things, but he thinks he has the guys to do it. He talks a lot about how all 5 of his tight ends last year played at points in the college football playoff. Then you add a guy like Max Clare to that room. They feel really good about it. And, it's maybe a dynamic that this Ohio State offense hasn't really used in the past in terms of the passing game that they might be able to catch teams on early.
Pat, I'll sneak one last question in here.
Sure.
We were talking off air, and you talked about, kind of your read on Ohio State's players, or maybe just, overall, right? Maybe feeling a little bit tight or a little bit, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess if you could bring that to the audience, what did you feel from your guys' media availability? Because one thing that I know, and I've talked with Chip about this before, Steve Sarkisian made a point, Pat, after they went to Arkansas and won last year. I was down the field and I actually witnessed this firsthand. The guys kind of all organically gathered around the tunnel, and it's supposed to be this game that's super tight, right? Super, tense. They got smoked by Arkansas the last time they went there in 2021. And the guys are all coming out rapping a song, right? And Sark's there in the middle and he's nodding his head. And, he admitted he didn't know the song. He didn't know the lyrics, but he's just bopping his head, noting that the guys are loose, right? And he's getting the energy off of them. And that's something that's been really noticeable about Texas really over the past 2 years on the road, right? Is how loose they are. So to bring that back around to kind of a question for you, Pat, what's your read, just 10,000 foot view on the Ohio State players entering this matchup?
So it's this kind of dawned on me when we got the information last week of our media availabilities. And they, as I was telling you guys before we started recording, they had Ryan Day on Tuesday. We're recording this on Wednesday. Tonight we'll get the 4 captains. which isn't normally how Ohio State does a normal game week. Usually after we get Ryan Day, we get at least one coordinator. We get more players, a larger group, sort of a bigger set, try and get somebody, especially before a big game, try and get somebody from each position, those type of things. And this is a much smaller, tighter group of guys that are going to speak this week. And it reminds me a lot of what Ohio State does during Michigan week. And on those weeks, they have one availability. It's all done on Tuesday. You get Ryan Day, you get a coordinator or two, and you get the players. It's all just like one day so they can focus on Michigan. Well, if you've paid attention, Ohio State hasn't done too well against Michigan the last 4 years. So I was wondering, are they tight for this game? Are there nerves? And, they don't want people to say things, whatever it may be. And then Ryan Day on his brief appearance on one of the local radio stations that he does every week on Monday nights mentioned you never feel ready, but you got to be ready. And I was like, I don't know if that's what you want to hear coming into this week. Now, I will say we talked to Ryan on Tuesday at his normal press conference. I thought he seemed much more, still very focused on this game, still very businesslike. I think next week when they play Grambling, he'll be a little looser, but seemed much more comfortable than maybe was. And I don't know if maybe my read on this was all wrong. We'll see how the players sound when we talk to them this evening. But I felt more, if you're a Buckeye fan listening to that, you probably feel more relaxed. Now, I will say, listening to Sark, listening to some of the guys you talk to, I do feel like that the way you describe Texas is just loose and ready to go. I don't know if I get that vibe for Ohio State, but I look back to last year in the college football playoff run. I don't think they were that way. It's just a different team, different kind of, approach. But there's a reason Texas has won so many games on the road, right? I think that approach is helpful when you head into those games in big time environments and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm probably reading too much into it. If Ohio State wins, people will tell me I was crazy. If they don't, maybe people will be like, hey, Patrick saw this coming. So, who knows? But yeah, it was something I observed. Take it with a grain of salt or not. It's really up to how your fans want to listen to it. But yeah, it was just interesting to me early on because I did think, okay, Tuesday we'll get Ryan Day, we'll get Brian Hartline and Matt Patricia. Then we'll get player, and then it all kind of changed. And then maybe, again, I might be reading too much into it, but just something I noted.
Yeah, Texas will bring an 11-game winning streak in true road games into this contest. Patrick, with all that being said, how do you see this one playing out? What's your prediction for this one?
Yeah, I haven't done a score yet. We usually do that late in the week. I was talking on one of our podcasts yesterday with Dave Biddle from our site, and we both agree this should be a really good game, really close. I'll probably end up picking Ohio State for the sole purpose that this game is at Ohio Stadium, despite that 11-game win streak on the road. I think if you flip this and it's in Austin, I'd probably end up picking Texas. But I think we're in for a really good game. I think these are two teams. Obviously, Texas has gotten a lot of hype this offseason, being the number one team in the country. Not that Ohio State hasn't. I just think people on the outside look at how much Ohio State lost and are not sleeping on the Buckeyes, but maybe not valuing some of the guys that are going to step in. When I'm watching these guys practice or at the facility waiting before interviews, just like, wow, this guy and this guy and this guy are ready for, we've heard about this guy for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. So I think these are two of the best teams in the country. I think if things fall right, that we could see this game once again rematched in the college football playoff. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the score will be, but I think it's going to be a close one down to the fourth quarter. I think the Buckeyes probably pick it up just because they're at home. But again, I probably would have said that in 05, and that didn't play out that way.
Well, were you at the game in 05?
I was not. I watched it on TV.
Okay, because Texas fans talk about how intense the Ohio State fans are and how, they'll get right in your face. And some Texas fans are not making the trip this time because of that. Is that now some people say it's a bunch of tailgaters outside who are not going to the game, who are causing most of the ruckus. What's the reputation there for opposing fans coming into that stadium?
Yeah, I think for the most part, and maybe I'm biased living in Columbus, but I think for the most part, Buckeye fans are pretty welcoming. I know when we did a podcast earlier this offseason, you mentioned that. I can't say I'm surprised. You have a fan base like this that's as big as both of these fan bases, really, you're going to have some people that are going to do some dumb things, especially that 05 game was a night game, right? You get drinking all day. I imagine people will be pretty lubed up for this game, but you don't have all day to drink given the noon start, which is a whole nother topic. But I would say, I think Texas fans that are coming up here for the first time will have a good time. I have heard that was, and a lot of people have told me this, the best atmosphere in Ohio Stadium history, I guess I should say. I've been at some pretty good ones, both, in the stands and as a media member. But the people that were there, at least from an Ohio State perspective, talk about just like the crazy atmosphere that was. And, let's hope from a just college football neutral standpoint, we get something similar, even though fans won't have as long to tailgate for this one.
Well, Patrick, we really appreciate your time today. We'll see you on Saturday in Columbus. Any tips for us getting to the game or anything? Places to eat?
Yeah, get there early. They're changing some of the traffic stuff around the stadium to make it more amenable for fans, like closing off some roads and things like that. So I would get there early. And in terms of food, let me think about that one. I'll give you guys some recommendations, and you can share them with people. But there's plenty to do around campus. The tailgate's not a huge thing because there's not a lot of parking right by the stadium. But if you walk to High Street, there's bars, restaurants, and then further down off campus, the short north is sort of a trendy area that's walkable from campus that has, lined with bars and restaurants and stuff like that. So I imagine both sides will be getting into some trouble, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Patrick, we appreciate it, man. We'll see you Saturday.
Pat, before you run, I've got the shore north and the eastern area. That came from your colleague Steve Elwagen. So you can let us know if those are yay or nays.
Yeah, the short north for sure. That's what I'm talking about, right down the street from campus on High Street. The eastern area is a bit further out, depending on where you're staying, but it's sort of like an outdoor mall. They've got a movie theater and stuff inside, but a lot of shops, a lot of restaurants, stuff like that. It's just, it depends where people are staying. But yeah, I think, look, it's a big city, just like Austin. I've been to Austin before. There's plenty to do. I don't think people are going to struggle to find things to do Friday night, Saturday night, Saturday before the game. But yeah, I would, if you're staying further out from campus, get down there early. Game day, Fox Big Noon Kickoff, both going to be there if you're interested in those. They're on either side. One's on the north side of the stadium, one's on the south side of the stadium, but easily walkable. And then there'll just be stuff going on around. I think everybody should have a good time. And I think, look, these are why we do this for. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Patrick, thanks so much for the insight. We'll see you Saturday.
All right. Sounds good, guys.
All right. There he is. Patrick Murphy, Bucknuts.com, the Ohio State site on the preeminent 24/7 sports network. Eric?
Yes, sir.
Some interesting nuggets there from Patrick. Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, Chip, I'm going to come back to, and I know this sounds mundane, right? I know Pat, kind of couched it by saying, maybe we're reading too much into it. Chip, I don't think he is, and granted, it could be, as Pat said, right, just a shift in the way they do things more catered towards their Michigan week. But Steve Sarkisian, I wrote in my 4 downs. I was trying to pull up the quote really quickly, but the gist of it is Steve Sarkisian, after the Arkansas game, Chip, and I'm going to post the tweet in here where I took the video as it's loading into the system here. I will put it up so you guys can check it out. I was hoping I'd get the link there. Unfortunately, I can't. That's just a tweet. But nevertheless, Chip, I sent you the video, and maybe we'll discuss it after the game and get your thoughts. Steve Sarkisian said, yeah, I noticed this is after the Arkansas game, heading into the Kentucky week, which was the week following last year, saying, yeah, I noticed the guys, they're supposed to be all tense, right? And going to this venue, it's hostile and so on and so forth. And they're just organically rapping the song, right? And if you watch the video, again, I'll tweet out a link. You just see Chip, Barron Sorrell, Jade Barron, Jaden Blue, Kelvin Banks. These guys look like they're at home. They look, metaphorically and literally at home coming out there, right? Chip, in a game of this magnitude, especially the first game of the year, I'm sorry. I think those things matter. We're not talking about, no disrespect to Grambling, Ohio State versus Grambling. We're talking about Texas versus Ohio State. The talent level, the disparity is, if there's one, it's that little. Okay. So I'm sorry, Chip, and you can let me know if I'm making too much of it. I think little, quote unquote, little things like that can make the difference, because the last thing you want to do is fall behind, 7-0, 14-0 at Ohio State and then get your footing, right? You walk in there loose, confident, ready to go. That stands out to me, Chip.
Yeah. And I think Steve Sarkisian does a really good job of getting his guys in the right mindset when they go on the road. I think back to what he said before they went out against Alabama. He said, we're going to be aggressive. Trust us. And man, that's what players want to hear. And he also told them, take it all in as you come out of the tunnel. Take in this atmosphere. Take in, this is what it's all about. This is why you come to Texas to play in games like this. And I think it's been reflected on the field. Now, it helped that Quinn Ewers was unbelievable against Alabama, unbelievable against Michigan. How does Arch Manning, come out in this game? But I think you're right. Now, a lot of those players you just mentioned are gone, Eric. And so I got the sense on Monday that this defense has got swag for days. Like they, as a collective group, I think they feel like we bring in the ruckus. The offense, we'll see how that plays out, because I do think it's going to take a minute for this offense with the offensive line. You're going to have Trevor Gooseby with a cast on his hand playing in this game. It's going to might take a minute. I think this Texas defense, though, is, and I've said this week, I think the Texas defense is the swag 20 years later that Vince Young was in terms of swag for Texas back in 2005. And it starts with number 1 and number 0, who, if you combine them, it's number 10. But Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill Jr., those guys sort of set the tone, and we'll see. And I do think Ethan Burke is as hungry as you can be. He's a senior now and had to kind of take a back seat to Trey Moore last year. The guy's just, and he's just scratching the surface. He came from lacrosse, for crying out loud, and is now 5 years into football full time. So, I think you're right though, Eric. I mean, if your coach is loose and feels like the preparation is we're ready, so go cut it loose, have fun. That's important stuff, because the transformation that happened in 2005, Mac Brown used to be, no one talks on the bus, on the way to practice, on the way to the game from the team hotel. Like if anyone said anything, Mac would turn around and be like, who's talking? And Vince, VY was the one who said, hey, coach, can we just be us? And by the end of the 2005 season, they're doing full-blown flow sessions on those buses. VY, Tony Hills are up in the aisle of the bus, leading all the, it was a totally different vibe. And now, now that's the vibe. And so I think you don't worry about Texas in terms of being uptight going into a game like this. Would you say?
Yeah. Really quick. Our guy, Rex St. Charles. Rex, I appreciate you commenting as always. Rex says, you're definitely taking it too far, referring to me. All of that stuff goes away once the ball's kicked off and guys start hitting and coaches start making adjustments. Rex, I'm to be clear, and I don't think Chip is saying this either. None of us are saying that, if you come out loose, that means you can go out and play bad football. None of us are saying that at all. Just that with all of the pomp and circumstance around this game, there is a swagger, there is an attitude around coming out and showing that despite all this stuff that's supposed to be so intimidating, Ohio Stadium sits 101,000. I'm sure it'll be north of 105, 106,000. All this stuff, right? How hostile it's supposed to be. You're not fazed by it. That you're just going to play ball, right? To me, that mentality allows guys to play loose, Chip. So I do agree with you. Well, I'm not disagreeing with Rex. That just stands out to me because, Chip, you and I both, for the most part, any stadium that we can get down on the field pregame, we're there. And you notice it, right? Like Steve Sarkisian said it, the kind of a follow-up to the quote I was talking about prior to, or I should say after the Michigan game. He said his players instill confidence in him by the way they carry themselves during the week, by the way they're practicing, by the way, they're walking through the hallways, by the way they are on the bus. So I'm not saying like it's going to, if Texas is down to, knock on wood, a fifth string quarterback, that being loose can overcome things. I'm just saying that if all things are equal, that mentality kind of plays a factor there, Chip. I'll throw this one out to you really quick. I don't remember, but again, I was gone Monday. I had to deal with a family issue, so I'll defer to Chip here. I don't remember there being an issue with Colton Vasek. Do you?
No, not that, unless something's happened in the last day.
Okay.
I asked Ethan Burke about Colton Vasek on Monday, and he said, yeah, he's primed and ready to go. I hope he just plays with confidence. So, Colton Vasek's been, derailed by injuries his first 2 seasons at Texas, but Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons have all said here recently he's ready. So unless something's happened in the last 24 hours, I think you'll see Colton Vasek playing in this game. Eric, the offensive tackles for Ohio State, that's significant. In my mind, this game is going to be won or lost by the Texas defense, and that's not fair to put it all on them, but they're the group that has all the depth, all the, they have big time difference making playmakers at every level of their defense. And we're taking the word of the coaches that they've got a 3 deep rotation at defensive tackle. You heard Patrick Murphy saying they feel good about their starters at defensive tackle, maybe one other guy. If Texas is going to be rotating 4, 5, 6 guys and Ohio State's going to be rotating 3, that should show up in the fourth quarter. We'll see. I'm not sure who's going to be able to run the ball in this game. I think, Quintravian Wisner's coming off a little bit of a ding in the second scrimmage. CJ Baxter's coming off the LCL, PCL. Christian Clark's coming off the Achilles. And Ohio State's got 2 new running backs in Peoples and CJ Donaldson. So I think it's going to be fascinating. And of course, Arch Manning, everybody's, every sports show you turn on right now is, what's Arch Manning going to do in this game? What? Your thoughts on Arch and what you expect from him in this game?
I'm going to work in reverse really quick here, Chip. I will get to Arch, but I want to kind of piggyback off what you mentioned as far as Ohio State's offense versus Texas's defense, right? I'll give you a matchup that I find super interesting, just coming off of what Pat said. Pat said that Ohio State's receivers, Brian Hartline, of course, former Ohio State star, now the OC, is cross-training guys, right? So you're not just locked into one spot, the X, Y, or wherever, Z, so on and so forth in the offense. If Texas does start Grayson Littleton at star, and again, we'll see whether it's Grayson Littleton, and from what we heard from Steve Sarkisian, it's not going to be one guy, right? You'll get Jelani McDonald. Depending on the matchup, they will play different players. But could you envision a scenario where you have Jeremiah Smith in the slot going up against a freshman DB? We know Grayson Littleton, and I've shouted out Wiregrass Ranch, which that got me in trouble last week. I will make the apology for that next week because we don't have time for it this week, quite frankly. But we've talked about him coming out of Wiregrass Ranch and type of camp he's had, but that's still a tall task, right? To be a freshman DB going up, whether it's, 10 snaps or 2 snaps against arguably the best player in college football. That's something to keep an eye on. Even Carnell Tate, who's a heck of a receiver in his own right? That's another deal to keep an eye on. And we heard Steve Sarkisian say whether, we need a more physical guy, maybe we'll play a Jelani McDonald or someone else down there, right? So that is something super interesting when you talk about Texas's defense. Quickly on to Arch Manning, Chip, and I definitely want to give you a chance to respond to what I said about the slot, but quickly on Arch. I feel like at times I've been one of the few people in the Austin market, shouting into the wind. Arch has only made 2 starts, guys, and they've come against Louisiana Monroe and Mississippi State. Not shading ULM, not shading Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State, but this is first road start, and it is at Ohio State. I just really, the expectation for Arch Manning can't be he's going to come out and do what he did against UTSA, right? And account for 5 total touchdowns and 2.5 quarters of work. The expectation can't be that he's going to complete 70% of his passes like he did against Mississippi State. It wouldn't shock me if he's somewhere in between Mississippi State and Louisiana Monroe when he completed 52% of his passes. I think the targets for Arch should be what they are for any young quarterback. Chip, don't turn the ball over, play confident, hit the throws that are there. And you've been, really honing in on this over the offseason. When the opportunities are there for him to use his legs, right? Of course, as his granddad says, get out of bounds. Ends every text with that, right? I'm sure he'll find his way into doing that in this game. But that's my expectation for Arch Manning, right? We've been around Arch now for 3 years and in specificity with him as the QB1, for a few months, right? Nothing phases him in terms of the talk and the atmosphere. Nothing about that is going to phase him, right? So that is not a concern. My only, thoughts with Arch Manning are purely on the field because the other stuff is not going to phase him.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, you got to look when you have a defense like this, and we've heard great things about Jack Bomeister, the punter who can flip the field position. This is going to be a field position game. You've got to take care of the football. A sack is okay. You've got a punter who can, get the ball flipped over to the other end of the field. You got to take care of the football here. And I do think this is a game where Arch is going to have to use his legs a bit to, but the defense needs to help him. Defense needs to give him a short field. I mean, Michigan beat Ohio State because they intercepted a pass and ran it back to the 2, and Michigan's totally inept offense could score from the 2. And they won 13-10. So it was the only touchdown they got, Eric. The other, they got 2 field goals in that game to win it 13-10. All right. You ready for some take it or leave it?
I don't know if that Michigan take is going to earn Chip Brown any fans back home in Michigan. I am ready, sir, for some.
Hey, they won.
They did win. They did win. I'm ready for some take it or leave it, Chip.
Okay. All right. Who's serving first?
Chip, I am serving to you. Take it or leave it. Number 1, Texas holds. Ohio State star wideout Jeremiah Smith, the 3 catches or less. Take it or leave it, Chip.
Yeesh. Man, last year they had Andrew Makuba over the top of them. This year, I mean, they'll have experienced safeties over the top of them. Derek Williams, Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald. You know what? I'm going to take this. If I'm talking up this Texas defense, I'm going to take this and say that they zero in and make sure that Jeremiah Smith does not beat them, which means they'll probably give up, 6 or 7 receptions to Carnell Tate or Max Clare. But I'll take this, Eric. I may be foolish. He's at home, but he's also got a young quarterback. I'll take it.
Chip, I am going to leave it, but that doesn't mean that Texas is in trouble. Not all catches are created equally. I think there's going to be an effort with a young quarterback in Julian Sayin. And we heard Pat talk about, some of the things he did in practice and the way he was throwing the football. That echoed, Chip, what Steve Sarkisian said when they were recruiting him, talking about how much his, ability in terms of just being a pure passer, right? How advanced that is. But I am leaving it because I think it wouldn't shock me if he has 4 or 5 catches for 40-something yards. That doesn't mean he's beating you, right? I still think 2 things can be true. You can make Carnell Tate and other guys beat you. And also, I think there'll be concerted effort to get the ball in Jeremiah Smith's hands. So I am leaving it, Chip.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they could probably throw a wide receiver screen behind the line of scrimmage to him, and, then you got to get him to the ground. All right. Take it or leave it. Number 2, Arch Manning rushes for at least 30 yards against Ohio State. Eric, take it or leave it.
Yeah, Chip, you and I both are on the train of why does college football still count sack yards, right? So, you didn't add the addendum of sack yards adjusted yards, right? So if it's just rushing for 30 yards, I'm going to leave it. I do think Arch, if we're doing sack adjusted, I do think Arch will get around 40, 45 yards on a scramble. I think there's going to be an opportunity for him, right, to use his legs. But
well, let's do it. Let's take the sacks out of it.
Take the sacks out of it. I'll take it, Chip.
Okay. I will take it as well. Yeah, I think this, Steve Sarkisian said at SEC Media Days, we got to get out of this stadium with a W. We'll do whatever it takes. There are going to be some games where, Arch's athletic ability, we probably need to lean on it a little bit more, not major in it, but lean on it. I think this is one of those games. I mean, Texas averaged 2 yards a carry against Ohio State 8 months ago, and they need to run it a little better than that to help Arch Manning out. Arch can help himself by running it and helping to provide his own running game with his own legs to keep the defense off balance. All right, take it or leave it, number 3.
I'll bring us home, Chip. Take it or leave it, number 3. The defenses of Texas and Ohio State keep total. Score of the game, 47.5. The under there. Take it or leave it, Chip.
Yeah, I'm going to take this. I do think this could be an ugly game, honestly. This could be a lot of punting and field goals. And because I do think the defense is Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles. I don't care who's up front for Ohio State. Those two guys are really impressive. Caleb Downs is an eraser. He's the second coming of Earl Thomas. He covers that much ground. So I'm going to take this, Eric. The total goes under 47.5. What say you?
Sorry, Chip. I'm having a good time looking at Tony. We clearly have an Ohio State fan watching. Listen, we take all viewers, Chip. We love viewers. I'm just watching some of the comments there from Tony. I will take it, Chip. I do believe, I think it was during the summer when we did kind of our initial, how do you see the season playing out? And I think I said something like 22-19 Ohio State. And I said that I want to see how Texas's offense shapes up in fall camp, because as we've talked about in this show, offense takes a little time to hit the ground running. I want to see how Arch Manning, how the offensive line, how some of the new pieces come together. I am leaning towards flipping my pick because of how confident I am in Texas's defense. And I think I've seen enough from Texas. But if I do flip my pick, the score isn't going to change. I still see this being a 22-19, 21-17 type of ball game. So I will take the under, Chip.
Okay. All right. We only disagreed on one.
Hey, Chip, I forgot we're scoring him now. So we got to get back in the mindset.
Right. We're scoring it now. We'll let you know how we did next week on the Flagship Podcast when Eric and I will be back to recap Texas at Ohio State. And this is what an opening week. We didn't even get into Clemson, LSU, and my gosh, Miami, Notre Dame. We got what an opening week. We'll get into all of it. And thanks to Pat Murphy of Bucknuts247. Get over to Horns247.com. And if you're not a member, take advantage of this 50% off annual membership that's happening right now, but it is about to go away. And you get so many additional perks for joining Horns247. And listen, you get, first of all, if you become an annual member, you get VIP access to all the team sites on the preeminent 247 Sports Network, including Bucknuts.com. All the opponents that Texas will be facing this year. Great content, great scoop. Eric, myself, Hank South, Jordan Scruggs, Will Turboff, bringing you the nuggets on a daily basis. So get over there, take advantage of that right now. Feel free to like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel. And until next time, we'll see you over at Horns247.com. For Eric Henry, I'm Chip Brown. Until then, stay safe and keep the faith.